I'm Marcus Rell, and I had no idea that the very family I'd spent years quietly supporting would shove me so effortlessly into the margins of their lives. All I wanted that day was to help make Ava's wedding, the most important event in my wife's family calendar, a memory everyone could hold close. That meant writing the checks they couldn't. Venue? Mine. Flowers and imported orchids? Mine. The open bar everyone would fawn over on Instagram? Mine. I never cared for credit. I never stood on a table to announce what I'd given. I just did what I thought a good husband should: support Clara, stand by her family, and be the invisible scaffolding holding their image up. I showed up to the Vineyard's reception venue early, still a little anxious that something might go wrong with the ice sculptures or lighting. Clara had picked out my suit herself, a charcoal gray tailored number with a tie that matched the bridal palette, soft mauve. She had insisted I look the part. I did. I always tried. As I stepped out of the car, adjusting the cufflinks she gifted me last Christmas, I told myself this would be a good day. A celebration. A culmination of generosity and love. I didn't expect a thank you, but I certainly didn't expect what came next. The staff member at the check-in table was polite enough. Young, distracted, her eyes flitting over the clipboard as she searched for my name. Then she pulled out a plain white envelope and handed it to me like it was a formality. Inside was a seat assignment card, nothing fancy. My name, Mr. Marcus Rell. Underneath, in small script, Table X, outside, near trash disposal area. I actually laughed. I thought it was some kind of glitch. A misprint. A prank, even. Surely, someone had made a mistake. I walked inside to find Clara, but before I could get far, a different coordinator intercepted me and asked if I needed help. I showed her the card, raising an eyebrow. She nodded and pointed toward the back. Yes, Mr. Rell, that's correct. Table X is just outside, by the side lot. I looked past the arched white tents, past the chandeliers hanging like dewdrops from the ceiling, and out to the dimly lit patio area visible through a set of glass doors. Still, I kept thinking this had to be an oversight. A clerical error. There was no way, after everything I'd done, after everything I'd covered, paid for, smoothed over, that anyone would deliberately assign me a seat near garbage bins. But as I made my way through the reception space, no one stopped me. Not one person waved me over or asked why I wasn't inside with the rest of the family. Guests were already sipping champagne and nibbling at foie gras. I spotted Clara across the room, laughing with Ava and one of her bridesmaids. She looked radiant, effortlessly glowing in the center of the room. She didn't see me. I pushed the door open and stepped outside. There it was. Table X. A folding chair. 1. A cheap banquet table that looked like it had been dragged from the back of a storage unit. No centerpiece, no linen cloth. Just a place card with my name taped to the plastic edge of the seat. The table sat a few feet away from a tall steel trash bin. The kind you'd expect behind a restaurant, not a vineyard hosting a six-figure wedding. To the left, a flickering heat lamp buzzed and clicked, throwing irregular flashes of yellow-orange light across the cracked patio tiles. Somewhere in the background, I could hear the jazz trio inside starting to play the processional. I didn't sit. Not yet. I just stood there, trying to make sense of it. That's when I saw her. Linda, my mother-in-law, the queen of thin smiles and weaponized compliments. She emerged from the venue, likely heading toward the catering tent, but when she saw me, she slowed. Took a good long look. Her expression didn't waver. She wasn't surprised. She wasn't embarrassed. No. Her lips curled into a smirk that chilled me more than the coastal wind ever could. Well, she said as she passed, her perfume leaving a trail of artificial jasmine in her wake. Guess you don't count after all. I didn't respond. I didn't ask her why. I didn't tell her how many times I'd covered her tax payments to save her from public embarrassment. I didn't mention the custom upgrades to the venue I personally arranged to meet her impossible standards. I didn't say a word. I just stared at the empty chair beside the trash. The truth hit me like the fog rolling in from the coast, quiet but consuming. This wasn't an accident. It wasn't a joke. It wasn't even a mistake. It was a message, and I heard it loud and clear. I held the card in my hand like it would suddenly change if I stared long enough, like the words Table X, outside, near trash disposal area, would magically rearrange themselves into something sane, something kind. I walked back toward the front, through a swirl of laughter and clinking glasses, and caught the attention of the venue coordinator. Her clipboard was clutched tightly against her chest, her smile polite but worn thin, like she'd already dealt with enough entitled guests for one day. I stepped forward, keeping my voice calm. "This can't be right," I said, holding out the card. She blinked, then glanced at the card, then at the clipboard in her hands. She flipped through a few pages, dragging her finger down one of the lists, then paused and nodded. "Marcus Rell, correct?" I nodded slowly, waiting. "Yes, that's your assigned seat. Table X, just out back near the side lot." "The side lot?" I repeated, my voice dipping lower. "Yes, sir. Right where it says. That's what the family requested." That was when something inside me shifted, not snapped, but slid. Something cold and solid settled behind my ribs. I didn't argue. What was there to say? I'd just been told, plainly and officially, that this wasn't a mix-up. This wasn't an error. This wasn't even an afterthought. It was deliberate. I stepped away before my silence turned into something else. As I moved through the tinted dining space, I saw how beautifully everything had come together. The chandeliers sparkled. The long tables glowed under the gentle flicker of hundreds of candles. Waitstaff moved gracefully, placing hors d'oeuvres on trays shaped like oyster shells. I walked past it all, the dream wedding I had bankrolled, and no one even looked up. No one noticed me. I stepped outside, past the curtain that separated the curated dream from the back corner where no cameras would ever pan. The moment the doors closed behind me, the music faded, replaced by the soft buzz of a heat lamp and the distant sound of traffic. And there it was. A table. Not even a real one. Just one of those foldable plastic rectangles. The kind used in church basements or community centers. A folding chair sat alone on one side. No place setting. No linen. Just a white paper place card with my name written in uneven marker, taped to the top. Beside it, a large steel trash bin hummed with the faint scent of leftover catering scraps. The heat lamp flickered sporadically above me, casting erratic shadows like some kind of bad theater lighting. I stood there, staring. I wasn't angry, at least, not in the traditional sense. No fire. No rage. Just something sharp, clean, and final sliding into place inside me. Something that felt like recognition. That's when I heard heels clicking against the concrete. I turned and saw her, Linda Sinclair, mother of the bride, social sniper, and reigning empress of passive cruelty. She was dressed in one of those glittering champagne-colored gowns that whispered wealth and control. She stopped a few feet from me, eyes grazing over my suit, then down at the table. "Oh," she said, as if pretending to be surprised, but her eyes were smiling. Not warmly. Smiling the way a predator does when it knows the prey won't run. "I see they got your seating arranged," she added. "Very fitting." I held her gaze, but I didn't speak. Her smirk deepened, and she leaned in just a touch, like she couldn't resist delivering the final blow. "Guess you don't count after all." And then she walked away. No theatrics. No confrontation. Just a well-practiced dagger slid between the ribs with the grace of someone who's done it all her life. I didn't follow her. I didn't storm in to make a scene. I just looked at the table again. At the chair. At the trash bin. The heat lamp sparked and whined above me. The laughter from inside sounded impossibly distant. I sat. For a moment, I let myself feel the full weight of it. Not just the humiliation of this moment, but everything that had led to it. Every check I'd written without asking for credit. Every time I'd covered for Ava, or smoothed over Linda's messes, or bit my tongue for Clara's sake. Every invisible contribution. Every piece of myself I'd willingly handed over to people who saw me as nothing more than a bank account with a heartbeat. I sat at that table and realized this wasn't new. This wasn't sudden. It had been coming for years. This was just the first time they'd said it out loud. "Guess you don't count." And that was when I stopped trying to. The music filtered through the thin glass doors, muffled and distant, like it belonged to a world I'd been exiled from. I sat at that flimsy folding table beside a humming trash bin, staring into the dim corner of a wedding I had paid for but had no place in. The plastic chair creaked under me every time I shifted, and the heat lamp above clicked and sputtered, casting flashes of artificial warmth that never quite reached my skin. I watched a piece of napkin float across the concrete and settle by my foot, and in that moment, I realized just how perfectly it all matched, how symbolic, how precise. They hadn't just excluded me. They had done it deliberately, with choreography and intent. Inside, I could see Clara, my wife. She was laughing, her arm looped through Ava's as they posed for photos. Her smile was wide, the kind that made people feel comfortable, welcome. But I wasn't included in that welcome. She hadn't even looked toward the back patio. Not once. Maybe she didn't think to. Or maybe she didn't want to. It should have made me angry. That would have been easier. Anger, at least, burns fast and gives you something to do. But instead, I sat there with something heavier. Something still, like cement settling in my chest. I wasn't surprised, not really. Not after years of watching how Clara shifted whenever her mother entered a room, how her voice changed when Linda was on the other end of a phone call. I'd ignored those signs, convinced myself that love required patience, that family dynamics were delicate and not mine to challenge. But there's a difference between patience and self-erasure. And somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being a person to them and started being a transaction. Ava had been in debt 2 years ago, bad debt, the kind that came with red notices and lawyers. Clara had begged me to help, and I did. Quietly. No interest, no terms. Just a check signed in the privacy of our kitchen while Ava sobbed in the hallway. And Linda, her property taxes had nearly cost her the family home. I made that disappear too. Clara didn't even need to ask that time. I just did it because I thought that's what husbands did. You protect the people your wife loves. You support the people she needs. Now here I was, near a trash can, with a seat assignment that didn't just dismiss me, it reduced me. I closed my eyes, letting the cool breeze sweep across my face. It smelled like wine and eucalyptus and faintly of spoiled food from the bins. But still, I stayed. Not because I was waiting for someone to notice or correct it, but because I needed the weight of this moment to settle in fully. I needed to feel what it meant, not just to be excluded, but to be erased from the very celebration I had built from the ground up. I wasn't just being disrespected. I was being told that no matter what I gave, it would never be enough. That I wasn't family. I was a utility. And utilities don't belong in the photo albums. They get stashed behind the venue, with the leftovers and the waste. Someone opened the door behind me, and for a second, I thought Clara had come to find me. My chest tightened instinctively, ridiculous. But there it was, that stupid sliver of hope. But it wasn't her. Just a waiter with a tray of used glasses. He glanced at me, startled, probably not expecting a guest to be out there. He hesitated like he might say something, then changed his mind and returned inside. I exhaled slowly, leaned back in the chair, and stared up at the darkening sky. There were no stars yet, just the dull glow of event lighting spilling over the back wall. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I didn't check it. I already knew no one inside was wondering where I was. And that was when it became clear. I wasn't sad. I wasn't even broken. I was done. Done pretending this family saw me. Done explaining myself to people who used my generosity as wallpaper for their pride. Done thinking Clara would one day speak up for me, stand beside me, or even notice when I was gone. There's a unique kind of grief in realizing the people you love never saw you as someone worth protecting. But there's also clarity in it. Cold, clean clarity. The flickering heat lamp buzzed again, and I stood slowly, brushing off my slacks. The chair scraped the concrete as I pushed it back under the table. I took one last look toward the glowing reception tent, where Clara now whirled on the dance floor with her sister. Not once had she turned to look for me. That was all I needed. I walked away. The gift sat in the trunk of my car, untouched and perfectly wrapped, its sharp corners covered in black satin paper and tied with a silver ribbon Clara had chosen herself. It was the kind of gift that made statements personalized, expensive, thought out. Not because I was trying to show off, but because I believed Ava deserved something that marked the beginning of a new chapter in her life. That's what I told myself, anyway. But as I opened the trunk and looked at the box now, it felt like a monument to my own foolishness. $8,000 of thoughtful craftsmanship meant to honor a bond that clearly never existed. I stood in the dim parking area for a moment, just breathing. The wind picked up slightly, stirring the edge of my jacket. Behind me, the music thumped faintly from the main hall, the bass of some upbeat track vibrating through the air. They were probably dancing now. Maybe the DJ had announced the bride and groom. Maybe Clara was smiling, holding a champagne flute, laughing in that rehearsed, airy tone she used whenever her mother was nearby. Not once had she stepped outside to check on me. Not once had she asked where I had gone. I'd watched her laugh for hours without even a flicker of concern cross her face. I picked up the box and shut the trunk softly. It was heavier than I remembered. Not in weight, but in meaning. My footsteps were slow, steady. I walked past rows of neatly parked cars, past the floral arch at the vineyard gate, and back toward the reception hall. The staff at the entrance glanced at me, but no one stopped me. I moved with purpose, and when a man walks with that kind of quiet resolve, people instinctively step aside. The music swelled as I stepped inside, the lights low and warm, casting a soft golden glow across the room. People were mid-toast or mid-laughter. Clara was at a table near the dance floor, turned toward Ava, her face lit with admiration. I watched her for a beat. That familiar profile. The slight tilt of her head when she was trying to look deeply invested. She hadn't seen me. She wasn't looking. I walked slowly toward the gift table, which had been set up beneath an elaborate floral installation at the far side of the room. Wrapped packages of all sizes towered on top, everything from designer cookware to cash-stuffed envelopes. I found a clear space near the center and gently placed my gift down. The ribbon slipped loose slightly, and I tightened it once, almost instinctively. It would be the last thing they'd get from me, and I didn't want it to be sloppy. As I turned to go, I heard my name. Marcus. I stopped. Clara's voice, light and confused, as though she was trying to place me in a setting where I clearly didn't belong. I turned slowly and saw her standing just a few steps behind, her hand still loosely holding a half-empty glass of wine. "Where are you going?" she asked, a faint smile playing at the corners of her mouth, like this might all be some quirky misunderstanding. Her dress shimmered under the low lights, and for a brief second, I remembered the woman I thought I married. The woman who once sat barefoot with me in our first apartment, eating takeout from plastic containers and dreaming about a life where we'd support each other through everything. I looked at her then, really looked, and I saw her, not as my wife, not as my partner, but as someone who had stood silently in a room where I was humiliated, who had watched me disappear into the background and didn't miss me, who had watched it happen, or worse, helped. I got home before the cake was cut. That was the irony of it all. Everyone was still clapping, still toasting, still pretending to belong to something polished and perfect, while I unlocked the front door and stepped into silence. I didn't bother turning on the lights. The house felt different already, like it knew the shift had happened. I slipped off my shoes by the door and walked into the kitchen, where the hum of the refrigerator was the only sound. A half-finished glass of whiskey sat on the counter from the night before. I poured it out and filled a fresh one, letting the burn coat my throat. Then I turned off my phone. Not just silenced it, turned it off completely. No vibrations, no notifications, no digital reach into my peace. I took the glass and sat down on the couch, letting my body sink into the cushions. My suit jacket was still buttoned, and I didn't bother taking it off. It felt like armor, and I didn't want to take the armor off yet. For a moment, I thought about the gift. I imagined the moment someone would finally get around to unwrapping it. Maybe after the reception ended, or maybe during the post-wedding brunch Linda had planned for the next day with her usual flair. Someone would assume it was something lavish, a luxury espresso machine or a limited edition sculpture, something worthy of a man who had footed the entire bill. Clara, maybe, would unwrap it, or Ava, or even Linda, if she got curious enough. Either way, none of them were ready for what was inside, not even close. Inside that carefully wrapped box was no blender, no fine crystal, no designer flatware. Instead, they would find a heavy black file folder. Inside, printed copies of every financial document I'd signed for their benefit. Notarized property transfer agreements, revoking the deed I'd quietly placed in Linda's name when she was about to lose the house. Letters confirming the closure of Clara's secret credit line, the one she'd asked me to co-sign when her spending spiraled. Ava's honeymoon fund, emptied, retracted, the transfer reversed from my private brokerage account. Frozen assets, letters from lawyers, paperwork that wasn't angry, it was final. And then the note, typed, concise, and signed with my name. It read, "This wedding cost me $62,450. Consider this my last gift. All ties are dissolved. All debts are returned. All accounts are closed. Paid in full." It was the truth, packaged in legal language and sealed with consequence. There was no shouting, no accusations, no emotional paragraphs about feeling hurt. Just math, boundaries, and finality. The silence in my living room felt sacred. For the first time, it wasn't a punishment or an absence. It was protection. It was mine. I leaned back and let it stretch around me. Somewhere out there, Clara was probably wondering where I'd gone. She might have thought I just needed air, or that I'd come back once the cake was sliced and the dancing slowed. But by the time she noticed the gift had been opened, by the time she saw what was inside, she'd understand. I wasn't coming back. The quiet stretched long into the night. I didn't check the time. I didn't need to. I watched the shadows on the ceiling shift as the room darkened naturally. No calls came through. No knocks at the door. The wedding was still humming along, powered by wine and appearances. I imagined the moment it would all start to crumble. Maybe Linda would scream first, her voice rising above the chatter as she clutched those papers. Maybe Ava would sob. Maybe Clara would freeze, her perfect image cracking like a dropped vase. And maybe no one would defend me. Maybe that was the final proof of everything I already knew. But I didn't need their outrage. I didn't need validation or a rewrite of the past. What I needed, what I finally gave myself, was closure. I took another sip and let the burn remind me that I was alive and that this moment was real. Not a fantasy or a plan. Not a someday. I had drawn the line. Not with anger, but with certainty. They had thrown me outside, near the trash bins, in a tailored suit I paid for at a wedding I had funded, and I had thanked them with a gift that couldn't be wrapped in bows or smoothed over with a smile. I had given them the truth. And the truth, unlike my silence, wasn't easy to ignore. By the time the night ended, they would understand what they lost. And me? I had already begun. The screams came in waves, though I didn't hear them firsthand. I didn't need to. I could picture them vividly enough. The tremor in Linda's voice when she realized the deed to her house was no longer hers. The gasp from Ava when she understood her dream honeymoon had just dissolved into air. The stunned silence from Clara as she stood among crumpled wrapping paper and legal documents, realizing what I had done wasn't a bluff. It was permanent. The kind of clean cut that leaves no thread hanging. I woke late the next morning, the sun streaming through the blinds as if the universe had chosen to cleanse everything for me. No more pretending. No more playing the role of supportive husband to a woman who couldn't be bothered to look up when I disappeared. I made coffee in the same kitchen where I'd once written checks to cover Linda's property taxes. The same space where Clara had asked, no, expected, me to fix the messes her family made. She'd stood right there, her voice smooth as silk, when she begged me to help Ava get out of debt. I had written those checks without asking for thanks. Now those days were done. I turned on my phone. 53 missed calls. Linda's name had filled half the screen. Clara's the rest. Ava had left 2 voicemails. I didn't listen to any of them. Instead, I opened the group text that had been created for wedding planning. All the Sinclairs, plus me. I scrolled to the very bottom. Someone had sent a message at 12:13 a.m. It was Linda. No punctuation. Just rage. How could you do this to your own wife? On Ava's wedding day? You are disgusting. Another message, this time from Ava. Marcus, please, we didn't mean anything by it. It was just a joke. Please tell me this isn't real. I almost laughed. A joke. Sure. Placing me beside the garbage bins, under a flickering heat lamp, after I paid for their 6-figure fantasy? A joke. It didn't feel like a joke when Linda looked me in the eye and told me I didn't count. It didn't feel like a joke when Clara saw me walking away and asked, "Where are you going?" with whine in her voice and nothing behind her eyes. I didn't respond to the messages. Instead, I opened a new note on my phone and wrote down a single sentence. They weren't sorry for what they did. They were sorry I did something about it. That was the difference. That had always been the difference. Clara finally texted mid-morning. How could you do this on Ava's wedding day? No preamble. No, are you okay? No attempt to understand. Just a reflexive defense of her sister and their image. The wedding mattered more than the man who funded it. I didn't hesitate. I texted back one line. How could you let them? Then I placed my phone face down on the counter and walked away. No follow-up. No clarification. No second text. Just silence. Not the cold kind meant to punish, but the intentional kind. The kind you use to protect yourself when you finally understand that nothing you say will be heard the way it's meant. That evening, I went for a drive. The air was cooler than it had been all week, and I rolled down the windows. I didn't have a destination. I just needed movement, distance, space. My thoughts weren't tangled. They were sharp, each one clear and clean. I passed a stretch of road lined with sycamore trees, the sun slanting low through the branches, and I let myself feel something close to peace. Not happiness. Not yet. But peace. Like the kind that settles in after a storm has passed and everything's quiet, not because the damage didn't happen, but because now, at least, it's done. Back at home, I poured a glass of wine and stood by the window, looking out at the small yard I'd landscaped by hand. I remembered when Clara had picked the flowers. She wanted hydrangeas, blue, full, photogenic. I had planted them without complaint. For her. For the dream of us. Now they looked like relics from a play I no longer starred in. My phone buzzed again. This time, it was a voicemail. From Ava. Her voice cracked immediately. Marcus, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I didn't mean it like that. Please, can we talk? Please don't do this to Clara. Don't do this to the family. There it was again. To the family. As if they were the victims. As if they hadn't made me the punchline of their private joke, and then gaslit themselves into thinking it was harmless. I deleted the voicemail. I had already done enough for that family. I had bought their silence for years. Absorbed their slights. Bit my tongue until it bled. But this time, I had spoken back. Not with anger or a scene, but with precision. With proof. With legal clarity. I hadn't raised my voice once. But they heard me anyway. And now, finally, they couldn't unhear it. 2 days passed without a word from Clara, and I thought maybe she'd finally understood what silence meant. But I was wrong. That morning, the buzz of the doorbell cut through my apartment just after 9. I was halfway through my coffee, the TV humming in the background with the news I wasn't really watching. I looked through the peephole before opening the door. Clara stood there in a cream trench coat, sunglasses perched on her head, clutching a white leather bag like it held her spine together. She didn't wait for me to invite her in. She stepped past me like she still had the right. You turned your phone off, she said, as if we were continuing a conversation instead of standing in the aftermath of a wreck. I didn't answer right away. I closed the door, walked back to the kitchen, and placed my mug down. She followed but didn't sit. She just stood there in the middle of my living room like it was unfamiliar now. Maybe it was. Maybe she was. I needed space, I said evenly. You didn't seem interested in hearing me before. She shook her head, lips parting in that disbelieving half-laugh I'd seen before. Marcus, what you did on Ava's wedding day. I held up a hand. If you start with that sentence, I'm going to ask you to leave. Her jaw tightened. I could see the battle behind her eyes, the instinct to double down on the narrative she'd rehearsed, to cast me as the villain for not quietly enduring their latest insult. But I wasn't her soft place to land anymore. I wasn't the man who swallowed everything to keep the peace. She looked around the apartment, and I watched her realize how little of her remained here. The framed photo we once had on the console table was gone. The blanket she loved on the couch was folded and packed away in a box I hadn't moved yet. The space had already begun the slow, quiet transformation into something that belonged solely to me. I talked to my mother, she said finally. Of course she did. She didn't mean for it to go that far. The seating thing was exaggerated. You were there, Clara. You saw where they put me. She looked down at her hands, fingers twisting the strap of her purse. It was a mistake. No, I said, my voice firm. It was a message. One you helped deliver. Her head snapped up. I didn't know they were going to put you out there. But you didn't ask where I was, either. You didn't look for me once. Not when I disappeared. Not when I walked out. Not when I stood beside a trash bin dressed in a suit you picked for me. Her face crumpled slightly, like she hadn't expected that truth to hurt when said out loud. I was trying to hold everything together, she said, voice cracking. It was Ava's day. My mother. Your mother has been humiliating me for years. And you've let her. I tried to manage it. No, I said, stepping closer, you managed me. You kept me quiet. Smoothed me out so I wouldn't embarrass you in front of them. And I let you. But I'm done. That was when I reached behind me and picked up the manila envelope sitting on the dining table. I held it out to her. What's this? Divorce papers. Already filed. All you have to do is sign. She didn't take them. Her eyes widened, tears threatening to fall, but I didn't move to comfort her. Not this time. You're serious? I've never been more serious in my life. She finally took the envelope, as if it burned her fingers. You didn't even give me a chance to fix this. I gave you years of chances, Clara. Every family dinner where I paid and stayed silent. Every time your mother dismissed me and you said nothing. Every holiday I was treated like an outsider. You didn't just fail to defend me, you let them decide I didn't matter. And now, they're facing the consequences. Tears slid down her cheeks now, real and silent. I never thought it would come to this. That's the problem, I said quietly. You never thought. You just assumed I'd stay. She stood there, speechless. The woman who once promised forever, who once told me I was her home, now staring at the door like she didn't know how to leave what she never truly protected. I don't hate you, Clara, I added. But I can't keep doing this. I won't. Her voice was barely a whisper. What am I supposed to tell them? I met her eyes, steady. Tell them the man they threw away finally believed them. She didn't speak again. She walked out slowly, envelope in hand, the weight of what she'd lost trailing behind her like a shadow. I didn't watch her go. I closed the door, locked it, and stood there for a moment, alone, steady, free. For the first time in years, I wasn't waiting for anyone to choose me. I had already chosen myself. 3 days after Clara left my apartment holding the divorce papers like they were written in fire, a letter arrived. Not an email, not a text. A letter, actual pen on paper, folded with care and tucked into a plain envelope with my name written across the front in deliberate, almost old-fashioned script. I knew that handwriting. I'd seen it on birthday cards, on the notes that once sat at Linda's perfectly curated dinner tables. It belonged to Gregory Sinclair, Clara's father. He hadn't said a word at the wedding. I had watched him from afar, tucked away in my exile by the trash bins, and he had never met my eye. Not once had he tried to reach out, to offer me even the most subtle sign that he saw what was happening. He had always been the quiet one, the man in the corner with a scotch in hand and a kind smile that never quite reached his eyes. He was background noise to Linda's performance, a shadow who followed her lead. So when I saw his name in the return address, I almost didn't open it. But I did. Inside was a single-page, cream-colored stationery, the ink a deep navy blue. It wasn't long, just a few paragraphs. But I read every word slowly, as if each one might rewrite something in me I hadn't realized still needed mending. Marcus, I'm not good with confrontation, and I've been worse with courage. That's something I've carried my whole life, and it's something I won't pretend you haven't noticed. But I watched what they did to you. I watched it happen, and I said nothing. And for that, I'm sorry. Truly sorry. I've watched this family make you small for years. I've watched them take and take while you gave everything. Your money, your time, your silence. You were the only man I ever respected in this family. You didn't shout. You didn't seek attention. You just kept showing up, and they treated you like furniture. Convenient. Unnoticed. What you did at the wedding, it wasn't cruel. It was honest. It was overdue. And as much as they'll never admit it, they know it too. I hope you find peace, Marcus. They never deserved your quiet strength. Gregory. I sat back on the couch, letter still in hand, the words echoing in the space around me. I read it again, slower this time. Not because I needed to, but because some part of me needed to feel every sentence settle into place. He had seen it. He had seen me. No, it didn't erase everything. It didn't undo the years of being made to feel like an accessory, the wedding night exile, or Clara's silence. But it did something I hadn't expected. It acknowledged my reality. It gave voice to a truth I had carried alone for far too long. I folded the letter carefully, almost reverently, and placed it in the drawer beside my bed. Not because I was clinging to it, but because some truths deserved to be preserved, not for vindication, but for clarity. For proof that I wasn't crazy. That I wasn't imagining the erasure. Later that evening, I stood in front of the mirror in the hallway, the same one Clara used to check her lipstick before we'd leave for one of her mother's dinners. I looked at myself fully, no tie, no polished shoes, just a man who had finally stopped begging to belong. My face was calm, but the tired lines around my eyes looked different now. Not worn, just weathered, solid. There was still no reply from Clara, no second attempt. Maybe the letter from her father had stirred something in her. Maybe not. It didn't matter anymore. That chapter was closed. What lingered wasn't anger. It was a strange, unfamiliar version of peace. I didn't have to prove anything anymore. Not to Linda, not to Ava, not to Clara. They could spin the story however they wanted, reframe it around their own comfort. Let them. I had my own version, and mine didn't come with conditions or revisionist grace. I spent the rest of the night reorganizing the apartment, not out of restlessness, but out of intent. I packed the last of Clara's things into a single box. A few framed photos. The scarf she always left on the coat hook, but never wore. The book she never finished that still sat on my nightstand. I taped it shut, wrote her name on the side in black marker, and placed it by the door. Letting go is never one dramatic act. It's 100 quiet decisions. And this was just one more. I poured another drink, stood by the window, and looked out at the dark sky. Gregory's words echoed in the back of my mind. They never deserved your quiet strength. I never expected validation from that family. But maybe, deep down, I had hoped someone would see me. And Gregory had. Maybe too late, but still, he had. And that was enough. Not to stay, not to try again, but to know I had been real in a room that tried to make me disappear. The wind off the Pacific was sharp and clean, cutting through the morning haze like a blade. I stood at the edge of the cliff in Big Sur, my boots dug into the loose gravel, looking out at the ocean that stretched endlessly in front of me. The roar of waves crashing against the rocks below was constant, steady, like breath, like time. It was the kind of sound that reminded you just how small you were in the grand scheme of things. And yet, Standing there, I felt more expansive than I had in years. This was my new home. Not just a location, but a choice. A life unburdened by performance, obligation, or apology. The house I'd bought sat 100 yards behind me. Small, minimal, built into the hillside with windows that opened to nothing but sea and sky. No neighbors. No Sunday brunches. No tense dinners where I smiled while Linda tore me down with a perfectly manicured grin. No more pretending. I didn't bring much with me. Just a few essentials, clothes, books. The letter Gregory had written me tucked in a desk drawer like a quiet monument. The rest, I'd sold or given away. I didn't need it. Let Clara keep the curated furniture and the wedding crystal we never used. Let the past sit where it belonged, behind me, untouched. I exhaled slowly, letting the wind rush over me. It had taken months to get here. Months since I walked out of that vineyard. Since I left the gift that detonated every illusion they'd built. Since I handed Clara the papers without flinching. At first, I'd waited. Maybe not consciously, but some part of me wondered if she'd come back with real remorse, a truth I hadn't yet heard. But it never came. She signed the divorce papers without comment. No fight. No reconciliation. Just her name, and that familiar looped script, marking the end. And in a way, that silence said it all. I wasn't angry anymore. Not at Clara. Not at Linda, not even at Ava. I had burned through the rage long ago. What I felt now was clarity. They had shown me exactly who they were, and I had finally chosen to believe them. I didn't need them to see me anymore. That had been the hardest part, letting go of the need to be understood, to be appreciated by people who never wanted to know the full weight of what I carried. I had always hoped that one day they'd see the sacrifices, the hours, the quiet support, and say, you mattered. But they didn't, and they wouldn't. And that was okay, because I saw myself now, and I mattered to me. I took a few steps forward, the gravel crunching beneath my boots. From this spot, the drop was steep, dangerous, even. But I wasn't afraid. I felt rooted. The sky above was pale blue, the kind that promised calm. The air smelled of salt and pine, and the faint trace of wood smoke from a cabin down the road. Everything was simple, clean, uncomplicated. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. A list, not of goals, but reminders. Things I'd written to myself in the early mornings after Clara left, when the apartment still smelled like her perfume and I had to remind myself not to look for her toothbrush. Your silence is not weakness. You do not owe them softness after cruelty. Love should never require you to disappear. You are not hard to love. You were just in the wrong room. I folded the paper again and tucked it away, not to forget it, but to carry it forward. Behind me, the house waited, filled with fresh starts and wide windows. Inside, a record player hummed with the scratchy warmth of an old jazz album I picked up from a thrift store. The fridge was stocked with food I actually liked. No more clean-eating mandates Clara used to impose like a badge of superiority. The books on the shelves were mine. The art on the walls wasn't curated for social approval. It just made me feel something. It was a life designed with intention, not performance. I didn't think much about the Sinclair family anymore. Every now and then, I'd get a text from someone mutual, always worded carefully, hinting that the family was still processing, as if I'd committed a betrayal instead of simply refusing to be used. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. If silence was my punishment in that family, it was now my liberation. The truth was, I hadn't just walked away from a marriage. I'd walked away from a version of myself that had spent years trying to earn love through sacrifice. I had bled in silence, thinking that was noble. That being the steady, dependable one would eventually make me indispensable. But the moment I stopped giving, I became disposable. And still, I didn't shatter. I didn't crumble. I rose. The waves crashed louder beneath me, a rhythm that felt almost like applause. Not for vengeance, but for survival. For choosing peace. For choosing myself. I turned and walked back toward the house, my footsteps sure, the wind behind me. I had no idea what came next. No grand plans. No timelines. Just space. Just time. Just the man I had always been. Finally free to be him, without conditions. I didn't need Clara's family to offer me a seat at their table. I had built my own. And it wasn't near a trash bin. It was facing the ocean.